Clarke, who is the Australian Country Manager and Bureau Chief for Argus Media. And for those of you that haven't seen, Argus Media is the exhibition stand at the end that everyone is crowding around. So lots of interest for Argus, which is fantastic. So welcome, Joe. Delighted to have you on board.
Oh, that's me. Thank you so much, Shahana, and thank you to Bioenergy Australia for having us here this week. So Argus is a price reporting agency, and we're really interested in what we can do in Australia to replicate what we've done in other parts of the world to bring price transparency and allow people to manage their risk, make investment decisions, and maybe feed into long-term contracts as well. This session is on enabling a holistic energy system and maximising social licence. I'm going to leave the social licence to people better placed than me to discuss it, but I do believe that a holistic energy system needs markets to be working well, and that is where Argus fits in. Between Tom Woodlock, who spoke this morning on our tallow pricing, and Dexter from our competitor earlier today, a lot of my thunder has already been stolen, so please bear with me. There are our notes. So, back. Okay. You may recognise this from earlier. So Argus is a global company. We were founded in London over 50 years ago, and we've been pricing oil and gas and then coal and iron ore, which is what I did for 10 years here in Australia. And now we're moving into agriculture, fertilisers, energy transition, carbon, and most excitingly, biofuels. We're recognised globally as benchmarks in several key commodities and are used by Australian government's associated agencies like the ACCC. So, what does a PRA do, or price reporting agency? We gather pricing information from the market and apply a well-tested methodology to reach an independent assessment of the real value of on a given day or week. Importantly, we are IOSCO and BMR compliant, and our reporters have the dubious pleasure of having their work audited by an external auditor. So focusing now on what we do in biofuels. We're a fairly early mover in the biofuel space, especially in Asia. Our market reporting teams receive many pricing points in the market, which robustly underpins our pricing. These prices provide the settlement value for biofuels futures contracts that are currently being used to manage risk. This includes the ICES futures contract that is settled against the Argus, UCAMI, FOB China and FOB Straits of Malacca, as well as European biodiesel, HVO and SAF. And just on the question I was asked earlier, the HVO futures at ICE has open contracts out to the end of 2025 at the moment. Argus provides extensive view of global biofuels ecosystems. The biofuels report contains Europe and Asia-Pacific market prices, and America's biofuels list extensive prices for North and South America. So please come and see us or the team in the foyer if you want a full rundown on the different prices that we produce. So in Australia, Tom Woodlock, who spoke earlier, assesses the export tallow price each week through really close contact with the domestic market here in Australia. And that grew in part out of some beef pricing that we're also doing up in Queensland, and it really shows our commitment to building prices that are useful for all players in Australia. Meanwhile, our colleagues in Asia keep a close eye on competing feedstocks such as UCO, palm, bursa and palm oil. And the Argus, FOB Singapore SAF and HVO prices are increasingly referenced. 2 years ago, we opened our office here in Sydney with the mission to build on the great work of our colleagues globally with a focus on markets in Australia and New Zealand. And this is where you guys come in. We want to hear what you think where you think price transparency would be useful, either in feedstocks, intermediary products, drop-in renewable fuels, or in renewable fuel blends. So please come and have a chat to us at the booth if you think there's something that we can do in the Australian market that would help in terms of providing that price transparency that people need when they're making investment decisions or when they're doing trading or when they are looking into the future and doing some research. So, you didn't really come to see me, so I'm going to pass you on now to our speakers. And first of all, we will have Gerard Ostheimer from the Biofuture Council and the CEO of Molecule Group. And then, I'm just going to read them all out, Gerard, and then I'll get you up, sorry. And then we'll have Sabiene Heindl online, from CEO of the Charter Energy Group, followed by Professor Mark Brown from the International Energy Agency, Bioenergy TCP Chair. And then Jim Snow will join us online as well, because he's been caught up in the cyclone in Queensland, and he is the Executive Director of the Oakley Group. And Virpi Barrett from the Director of Green Energy Commerce at Sunshine Hydro. And then finally, Steve Yardley, the Future Fuels Leader at GHD. So I'll pass you over to Gerhard first.
Right, so some of you met me yesterday, and I gave an overview, and I berated the poor senator around opportunities here in Australia. What I want to communicate today is my day job, which is helping industry participants engage in international processes so that we can, as a community, normalize the concept of sustainable fuels to a broad audience, right? And so if you think about it, we're in this trajectory where at this point, a lot of people, whether in government or in the public, have become fairly comfortable with the idea of SAF. They understand that this is a hard-to-abate sector. They understand that you can produce molecules, and they're sort of like vaguely on board. We need to deepen that appreciation across all the different sustainable fuel types, whether power to X or bio to X, and we need to deepen the idea that the future is a multi-fuel, multimodal future. Now, fortunately, the international trajectory has been relatively favorable to further deepening thinking and action on sustainable fuels, international actions to promote sustainable fuels across the international calendar. So in July of 2023, India hosted the G20. At that time, they actually launched what is now the Global Biofuels Alliance. And then Italy hosted the G7, and Italy took advantage of this opportunity to punch Germany in the face, because Germany likes to promote this electrification-only sort of dogma, despite the fact that they have a very vigorous agricultural sector and biogas sector. But Italy really wanted to point out that the idea that all we're going to do is electrify is false, and so it's really interesting to see these dynamics play out. And then, of course, our good friend Brazil last fall hosted the G20. And as I'll tell you, we got a lot of landmark activity from that. Shahana from Bioenergy Australia actually made the trip to that meeting, and I think you can talk to her independently that it was actually a fairly productive event. Now, moving forward, Canada is hosting this year's G7 due to their election. They've actually pushed the energy ministers meeting later in the year. South Africa is hosting the G20, and they've already indicated their agenda for this year. And again, sustainable fuels are very high on that agenda. And then, of course, we have Brazil hosting COP30, and as I've indicated with the inset, we hope that this will be the most molecular COP ever. And I'm going to give you some details of what I mean by that. And then it's not clear to me what the United States will look like in October or in 2026, but given the public outcry about the current misdirections that are happening, we might be in a pretty good place by as early as October of 2026. Okay, so drilling down more into what happened last year, or in the last little, so this is a summary of what happened. But basically, in terms of sort of deliverables, 2023, India launches the Global Biofuels Alliance. 2024, G7 energy ministers recognize the Turin Joint Statement on Sustainable Biofuels that I wrote. And then Brazil, G20, encouraged international stakeholders to increase consistency when assessing GHG emissions and carbon intensity of sustainable fuels. I'll talk more about that. And then we have these other things, including some reports from the IEA. Okay, so what we've ended up creating is actually a theory of change and an engine for change, where we build off of the evidence base produced by the International Energy Agency. We feed that evidence into an action platform. In this case, the action platform is called the Clean Energy Ministerial. And just last fall, they created their action plan to accelerate future fuels. Again, Australia should be in this group, and it is now my mission that, maybe I'll just put a bet, in 12 years, 12 years. By 12 months, Australia will be in this group. Okay. Heck, even by the end of the calendar year, I'm going to get Australia in this group. You heard it here first. Okay, and then what we end up doing is we end up creating international ambition. And what do I mean by international ambition? An example of an international ambition would be the fact that at COP28 in Dubai, that the world committed to tripling the use of renewable power, right? Wouldn't it be great for SAF, well, I guess for SAF there's Corsia, but wouldn't it be great if there was a simple high-level message that 100-plus countries have agreed to on everything from biomethane all the way up to eSAF. That's the kind of high-level commitment that we're talking about. And what I'll tell you right now is that we are working on developing a sustainable fuels, chemicals, and material target at COP30. And the idea is that we want an emissions reduction target. Why? Well, because that incentivizes getting fuels better and better and better. And so we're looking at a percentage or a gigatons target by 2035 or 2040. And the reason that we want, say, a percentage emissions reduction is because it would foster appropriate competition across modalities, whether it's e-fuels or biofuels, and it would really encourage and incentivize markets. Now, I refer to this sort of headline as the bright, shiny object. That's not where all the work has to happen. The work has to happen underneath that. So these essential sub-targets, where we generate carbon intensity reduction targets as a function of each fuel modality. And who has the information for that? Who is incentivized for governments to get that right? You are. And then we would want financing targets, where wouldn't it be great if there were goals of climate finance that could backstop all the hardworking people in finance we saw in the last session? And then there need to be innovation targets. We do need innovation, right? So we heard that, I think, was it Fischer-Tropsch, is it TRL4, or maybe I misheard that, but we know that the thermochemical routes need some work, and so we do need increased innovation. And then, of course, as is appropriately dominating the discussions here this week, energy security is fundamental. Energy security at all levels, because it's not just about energy security for wealthy countries, it's about energy equity and getting energy access and affordable energy to communities all over the world. Okay, so I told you that we have this platform for change, and this platform is called the Clean Energy Ministerial. This is a rich country club, so the countries in green are the members of the Clean Energy Ministerial, including Australia. And but they do account for 90% of the investments in clean energy. And for those of you who have any experience in the international space, you'll be very excited to learn that the Clean Energy Ministerial is not consensus-based. All right, somebody understood what that meant. So it's not consensus-based, and so we're not forced to the common denominator like the poor people that were struggling in the Cape with Corsia. Instead, we have this situation where it's a bottom-up approach, and individual countries are driving, or not individual countries, small groupings of countries drive various projects. And these projects cover power, transport, industry, buildings, environment, cross-sectoral, et cetera. And as of a few years ago, we've had work in the bioeconomy. As you might imagine, for most of the lifetime of this group, which has been around for 16 years, it was completely focused on green electrons. And so there's been some changes, and so we have a CCUS group, we have a hydrogen group, we have a Biofuture group, and it's all moving forward now in this acceleration of future fuels. So this subset of countries, these 9 countries, Brazil, Canada, India, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, Norway, UAE, and the US, have agreed on these action areas. So we want to work on increasing demand, we want to integrate global supply chains, but the really big one, where all the energy is in the G20 elsewhere, is this idea on common and transparent standards. Now, if you talk to an economist will blithely wave their hands and say, you just have to get the price of carbon right and everything will take care of itself. Well, we agree with that, but it hasn't happened. Well, why hasn't it happened? Because we haven't agreed on the accounting. Right? And so this is a big deal because right now, as many of you in the sector know, the accounting is done differently in Canada than it's done in Singapore, than it's done in Corsia, than it's done in California. This creates sort of headaches in terms of reporting and compliance, but it also puts friction into the market, so it's a lot harder to move products around. Now, if you've heard me before this week, I've become very enamored of the idea that Australia as a country should be lobbying the world for clarity on book and claim because none of your feedstock molecules should ever leave this country except either in the wind as a burned product or in the fuel tank of a 787 Dreamliner, right? The export of tallow drives me crazy. What are you people even doing right now? So we need... It's maddening. Can we not put an RD facility at wherever, Port Townsend or whatever this? Anyway, so it drives me bonkers. Drives me bonkers. Okay, so but how do we fix that? First, we have to get the life cycle assessment right. Then we get the book and claim right, and then the money. The world subsidizes Australia's fuel security. All right, and I keep telling people this. They're like, yeah, we know, but you're not saying it. Okay, so I'm going to say it. Okay. So anyway, so what I just wanted to say is that my job is to recruit, Bioenergy Australia. My job is to recruit industry into this dialogue so that policymakers just don't go, and so we've built, so on the last slide, these are all of our, on the last slide, these are all of our associations. Come on now. These are all of our associations, so we're strong in North America, surprise. South America, Europe, but very excited about engaging in East Asia because we have 2 meetings in Korea this year. We have a preparatory meeting, and then we'll be meeting again in August 27 to 29 on the margins of the APEC Energy Ministers Summit. You're all invited. I'm going to be having a great event, not as great as this one, but having a great event, and we will be welcoming industry input, and hopefully Shahana will help me engage all of you moving forward, but it will be your chance to kind of see how the world works and your chance to add your voice into, ideally, a consensus industry opinion on the issues of life cycle assessment and the issues of book and claim. Okay, so then we have all of these individual members, some of whom are represented in this room today, including LanzaJet, jumps out at me. But so what we do is, and I've kind of said this, but what we really do is we strengthen the evidence base for using sustainable biomass in the energy transition. So we want, at the end of the day, we function as an NGO and we want to provide you with the tools to make the arguments, whether it's to New South Wales or Western Australia or to India or whatever, about how biomass can be produced, should be produced, and will benefit the energy transition. I talked about this, but this was this Turin Joint Statement, which was over 100 companies signed on saying that sustainable biofuels are real and that they should be part of the energy transition. And then this was advanced by Italy in the context of the G7. I don't really have time to go into this too much, but briefly, the International Energy Agency is our knowledge partner in partnership also with the IEA Bioenergy TCP task forces. And Brazil invited the IEA to prepare some knowledge products around life cycle assessment. And they didn't like go into the nitty gritty of how you do the math, but what they said is, well, how are the elements of LCA being used in policymaking? And they came up with this sort of observation that had been intuitive, but here they make it quite explicit, which is that for a lot of activities, there's little uncertainty in the quantification. And there's little uncertainty in the impact on this carbon intensity score. But if we look over here at iLook is in the worst possible quadrant because there's a lot of uncertainty in how you use it, and there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how it impacts the carbon intensity score, which causes a lot of headaches for a lot of people around the world. Okay, this is actually my last slide. Well done. So anyway, I'm here to say that we lead a broad industry-led process to engage the G20 and the Clean Energy Ministerial. I really want to help you engage your government in Australia or at the state level to continue the work toward the ag energy interface. I have to say the progress since I first started coming here in 2016 is tremendous. Very happy to see that. Naturally, more can be done. And then we need to continue to strengthen the evidence base for biofuels. Thank you very much.
I'm just Sabiene can't see the slides, so I just thought I'd let her know that you are off and running, and also just remind everyone that there is Q&A options in the app, so please put some questions in there. Okay, Sabiene, over to you.
Fantastic, and apologies that I am zooming in. I will explain. Certainly, Gerard, that was a very hard act to follow, so I'm going to take you down to something that's vitally important for the rollout of biofuels and the creation or continuation of the sector, but something that is very human-centred. So let me start off with an acknowledgement of country. I'm joining you today from the Gunai-Kurnai lands down in Gippsland, where I pay my respects to elders past and present. We are currently on the ground with 80 landholder and community engagement folk who are learning about building trust in the energy transition. But of course, what we're really doing here is learning a lot about how difficult this is on the ground. So I've got a few slides. I can't see all of your wonderful faces. I'm keen to make this as interactive as possible. I know there's a Q&A afterwards, so please save your questions. We often start with well, what is trust? Because it sounds very amorphous, and particularly if you've got great engineers in your business, they will sort of look at you strangely as to what on earth are you talking about. And there's a great quote up there from the former CEO of General Electric, "You know when you feel it." Well, of course, if you say that to an engineer, they'll even be more confused. But the truth is, in the rollout of biofuels together with renewable energy more broadly, trust is a key component. And sadly, we know, and we've been working with energy businesses now, the charter was set up 7 years ago, that energy and trust don't really go hand in hand. And for those of you that have been in the energy sector for a while, you will not be surprised by the Edelman Trust Barometer, which shows that, first of all, there's been a massive decline across Australia in many sectors, but of course, energy is not doing so well and continues to fall down that list. It's just ahead of social media. And I remember in 2018, looking at these figures, we were just ahead of tobacco, not an enviable position, I'm sure you'd agree. So why should we care? And this is maybe when more of the finance people and project people get a little bit more excited about trust. It's a great book, Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust. There is an economic argument for trust, and that is when trust is around, speed happens. So we know in the rollout of any of these technologies, if you've got low trust, which is currently the environment that we're operating in, and perhaps even more so for biofuels because there's less understanding amongst the general public as to what it is, then we have communities that are understandably suspicious, they're not communicating well, they will be unfortunately influenced by mis and disinformation, and you've got projects that will grind to a halt. Now, these are the human issues, and these are the issues, of course, that we need to get across to the great engineers that are coming up with fantastic outcomes and projects that often won't get built or won't get built in a timely and, importantly, low-cost basis because of these trust taxes. And the inverse, of course, of that is when you've got a trust in a community, in an economy, then you've got people that are working really closely with you. They're confident, they're communicating, they're probably excited about your projects. And we've got a speed up on project time and a decrease in costs. Stephen Covey calls these trust dividends. So there's the simple equation, and I'm hoping that all makes sense to you. It's a great book. I'd really encourage you to have a look at it because it also talks about, well, how do you elevate these kind of conversations within organisations? Now, what does it mean to have a low trusted environment? Well, let me talk to you about renewable energy more broadly. We had a very comprehensive review, as some of you will know, done by the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, handed down at the request of the Commonwealth Government, handed down last year, and you can see those figures up there. Again, not great, nothing to be proud of when 92% of people, these are the people on the ground, landholders and communities, are dissatisfied with the way that project developers are engaging. Have a look at that report. It's very interesting and sadly probably still remains true to this day. What happens then? And you've all, I'm sure, been used to this kind of intervention. Perhaps in biofuels, it's less interventionist at this point, of course, but this is the trajectory. We had state and Commonwealth ministers accepting the report for a developer rating scheme. Queensland jumped the gun, announcing under its previous government a mandatory nation-leading renewables code of conduct. And we've got the Commonwealth leading a process for the developer rating scheme. All of these things, while good intentioned, of course, slow down a sector in terms of delivery and are a direct political response to communities, and in this case, a very, very important component of our community, farmers and the ag sector, and they've been mentioned today, saying this is not going well. We do not think this is being done well. So we talk a lot about trust through collaboration, and frankly, it's everybody's job in the sector. It's interesting when we speak to developers versus maybe the more, traditional members of the energy sector, and they don't want to be too closely associated with each other, of course, for some very good reasons, I'm sure. But unfortunately, in the minds of community, the energy sector is the energy sector. And whether you're a sexy new renewables developer or you're an old school transmission or network business, the sentiment, unfortunately, is the same. So we need to make sure people are really working together. We've done quite a bit of social licence modelling. I won't bore you with the details. It's contained in a social licence guide that's available on our website. And again, this is, fairly common sense. I would hope you prioritise trust, you're engaging meaningfully, you're managing your impacts and you're realising the benefits. So that's a template for how you operate on the ground. How are we doing in relation to these four elements? They sound simple, of course. For any of you that are involved in projects, you will know that it's far more difficult than that suggests. And there's lots of resources on our website, but of course, they're just artifacts of the real work that needs to go on. So the real work is the sort of work that we're doing at the moment in Gippsland. We're listening. We've got these 80 landholders and community engagement folk together. They're doing a deep dive into Gippsland, a very interesting community, of course, that have gone from old coal to coal-fired power stations now closing down. So there's significant work issues, workplace and employment issues. They've got offshore wind, which is exciting for some, not so exciting for others. They've also got solar and wind onshore. So a lot of communities being impacted here, and in some ways the perfect storm. The opportunity for industry is really to work together. And I guess what I really wanted to get across today is that for those of you that are in biofuels, which is super exciting, please recognise, as I'm sure you do, that from a community perspective, they are still going to see you as part of the energy sector, and that learning the lessons from some who have done not such a great job is really, really critical, and we want to help you to leapfrog. Unfortunately, the human element of the energy transition, no matter which part of it you are in, is the most complicated. And we were lucky enough to have Kathy McGowan, who was the former independent member for Indi, now on the chair of the board of AgriFutures, of course, speak to our CEO Council at the end of last year. And what she suggested, which I think is a really terrific suggestion and a great way of framing it, is you're all running really great engineering businesses and technology businesses. You need to tell your engineers to engineer the humans. That might sound a bit brash, but I think she's right. We really need to get away of encouraging everybody in our businesses to work together to understand that while there's a technology opportunity here, of course, there is also a real human element to this. And if we don't remember the humans, we're not going to do this well. So there's a great quote I like to end on: earn trust, earn trust, earn trust, and you can worry about the rest. And we're excited to see what the biofuels sector is able to do to also build up that trust. Thanks so much, and happy for some questions after all the other speakers.
Good afternoon. Those that weren't here this morning, my name's Mark Brown, and today I'm representing IEA Bioenergy TCP as the chair. My normal day job is with the University of the Sunshine Coast, leading a forest research institute. So today I'm presenting on a report that we've done in the IEA Bioenergy looking at social license and socioeconomic incentives as they relate to bioenergy deployment, mobilization of bioenergy opportunities. So just to pick up on a point that was raised in that presentation, I'll declare I'm an engineer here talking about social license issues, so I'm on the edge of my depth. But it is a well put together report, just recently published last month, available on our website. So a bit of background on IEA Bioenergy. So 23 member countries, 24 member organizations from across the globe. It is a consensus organization, as Jerry pointed out. It comes with its challenges. But basically, we present ourselves as knowledge generators and knowledge brokers, supporting the mobilization and deployment of bioenergy, particularly sustainable bioenergy. So we play in that policy, technical information. So we're not a lobby group. We provide the technical information. We let others use that information as they see fit in their business or their policy development. Believe it or not, this is a simple diagram of how we work. I will explain that a bit. So the blue boxes are the 11 technical tasks that we have in the TCP. If you can come up with a topic in bioenergy that doesn't touch on one of those, I'll be impressed. And then the circles around that kind of represent the environment in which we operate those tasks, and moving out from biomass supply out to the very technical aspects of producing bioenergy through different pathways, to engaging with energy markets and energy distribution, and then a number of logos you'll see there as different groups and organizations that we collaborate with. I wouldn't suggest that's an exhaustive list, but to give a context that we are a highly collaborative and engaged group globally. So to the report that we worked on, and this was what we refer to in our world as a strategic collaborative project. So 4 of those tasks contributed. We engaged key expertise from 2 or 3 of our key countries that were in a position to help draft the report, and look specifically at the issue of social license and what are the socioeconomic drivers of bioenergy. And probably a good news or good feedback to this group is a lot of what I'll touch on in this presentation is covered in much more detail in the report, is echoing a lot of the topics and points we've raised over the last day and a half of this meeting. But basically, we're grappling with public perception, and the previous presentation talking about engagement and public, working with the public. The concept of economic incentives and how do we drive or get over the hump of establishing and mobilizing the opportunity into an economically viable scenario. And then I can't say I've heard it more than I have the last couple of days, the importance of policy and, more importantly, stable policy. So what are, looking globally, again, this is the opportunity that this technology collaboration presents us with. It brings experts from a number of countries and gives you a bit of a global perspective. So the consistent issues or topics that have been and in many cases continue to be points of engagement and discussion are the role or the issues that bioenergy potentially presents in air quality and health concerns. So this is more in the burning of bioenergy for heat and power is common in Europe, but consistently will flow through to other uses. And then we also get into the world of food versus fiber, or food versus fuel, or land use, indirect land use, and again, we saw in earlier slides that issue. And then the trust in governance and sustainability. Is it really sustainable? Can we sustainably scale to where we need to be? And if we look at again, taking the global examples, in Scandinavia, we see real examples of how strong local community engagement and inclusion drives that support and adoption. And then basically through that grassroots work with people that own the land and manage the land, we see policy and economic incentives flow through, and then ultimately the economic development happens. Looking at the Australian context, we really need to find effective methods to directly engage with misconceptions, poor information. And again, the presentation before me couldn't be better placed in terms of that comes through community and engaging people across the value and supply chain that we need to work with, and doing that early and doing it often. This is just an example, so the challenge is down one side. I won't read them in detail. I've borrowed that from someone else's work, but it does come through to the opportunities to look at the environmental aspects and advancements and how we are as a sector addressing those concerns, and she mentioned it in the trust model, addressing your impacts, looking at the economic advancements and how we do see the economic opportunities, profit margins, and growth in the sector, and then the social advancement, how we're impacting the communities that we're in a positive way, economically, socially, and environmentally. Looking at the public issue or the public concern with biofuels and bioenergy more broadly, requires transparent reporting. And again, coming back to that engagement question that was raised in the earlier presentation. So being able to effectively and clearly communicate how we do have impacts, so we can't shy away from the fact that there are impacts to what we do, and how we engage in positive ways to drive that through good land use management and the benefits that flow through that quality of land management, including biodiversity and other things that can be enhanced by integrated land use. Industry collaboration is critical, so engagement. Too often we get into a scenario where we're developing a bioenergy or biofuel solution without actually bringing the people that produce the biomass to the table early in the process. They have huge amounts of experience and expertise about how you're actually going to physically put the biomass in a location to convert it, and waiting until step 10 in a 10-step process of establishment to include them rarely works well and rarely gets you the outcomes you're looking for. Public engagement, I won't go any further. She's touched on that in the earlier presentation of the importance. And then community-led bioenergy projects. So again, as much as you can engaging in the local community with local impact and understanding how that community is going to benefit is quite important and quite unique to the bioenergy space because we do locally source biomass to feed our biofuel and bioenergy initiatives. The investment success, again, there's been others that have gone through and covered this in much better detail, but financial viability across the supply chain. So everybody that contributes to the supply chain needs to be economically stable and viable. So that means equitable share of the benefits as they occur. Sustainable energy cost and price volatility, so variation is quite problematic. Long-term offtake agreements, long-term collaborative relationships that address that are quite important. Carbon abatement cost, so how we stack up against other carbon prices, and Jerry touched on a well-defined stable carbon price is going to make a whole lot of things flow, but how we get there is quite important to the success of this. Looking globally, and a number of other people have pointed out the stick and carrot comparison between Europe and the US, and probably would suggest in the Australian context that we learn from the best of both worlds and probably bring a combination of those to bear moving forward in our markets. Current gaps, so it's unclear what the long-term biofuel, so long-term blending requirements and so forth, so that comes into the long-term stability of policy. That drives your socioeconomic drivers as well as your social license. The lack of stable finance support, which links back to the lack of stable policy. So policy will drive investment. Investment over a longer stable term will drive project development and deployment. Inconsistency in regulations and sustainability metrics. Had a conversation over coffee that there's not a lot of clarity around how you define sustainability. And globally, there's a number of different ways that aren't necessarily consistent or necessarily trusted by the market. So getting across those issues is going to be quite important. So again, examples across the US and Europe that we can borrow from, and I think we need to. So basically, the summary of that, introduce national sustainability standards for biofuels, align biofuels with your net zero strategy, sustainable development goals, so doing that at a very national level. Incentivize biofuels in the hard debate sector, so which again we're already doing in this room is we're focusing on those hard debate sectors like SAF and heavy transport and shipping. That's where the wins are going to come from. Streamline the regulations, so get consistency, clarity, and understanding across regulations policy and align that globally. So key message is clear policy direction equals industry confidence equals success in this space. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jim Snow. I've been asked to present a paper today on the lessons we can learn from Australia's largest net zero greenwashing federal court case. So the shareholder activist group, the Australasian Centre for Corporate Responsibility, alleged that Santos engaged in misleading and deceptive conduct towards investors. This was in relation to its plans to reach net zero emissions by 2040, which is a combination of blue hydrogen, CCS projects and other emissions reductions, and that it would be emissions free. They said it's the first case of its kind in the world because they're using consumer and corporate laws to challenge the veracity of a fossil fuel company's claims. And that's true because these are normally laws that are enacted by the ACCC. So the ACCR engaged the Environmental Defenders Office to act on their behalf. And this is, as a civil case, the outcome is a fine, not a fine, but if proven, significant undertakings about future conduct and reputational damage. So it's important that the case also establishes some level of case law around these issues. Santos defended the claims. I was engaged by the lawyers to provide extensive expert witness testimony. That was nearly a year of my life. And to engage with the ACCR expert witnesses in preparing joint expert witness reports to the federal court. And we were cross-examined extensively in the federal court in late November. This case has now been completed and we're awaiting a judgment by the federal court judge, Her Honour Bridget Markovich. The Santos roadmap to emissions reduction is at the centre of this case, Scope 1 and 2, and also Scope 3, some of its customers. And that was an important part of the case as well. Hydrogen, blue hydrogen being provided to largely industrial customers, let's say, they would, under the ENGAS scheme, receive, for example, a zero emission outcome, even though there would be emissions still at Moomba. And this was a main part of what was being litigated. As you can see, the mainstream media were very, very interested in this case. There was reputational risk involved for Santos. Probably at the back end of this is really a social licence issue around what we can and can't do in terms of discussing transitions to net zero or to some level of low emission outcome over a period of time. So I've no doubt this will be a landmark judgment, and it will actually give some direction, I think, for people that are thinking about their transition plans and how they will communicate those to the public or their investor base. This case also covered a lot of gases. So it covered green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and blue hydrogen produced in different ways. It covered CCS, and it also covered biomethane and synthetic methane production. So in late 2023, I published a paper on greenwashing, which was some ideas from what I was getting from some of the cases I deal with. And these were things like don't jump the gun, track what the regulatory authorities are doing, be careful with your public statements, think about your forecasting, how you're going to provide evidence around it, and also understanding the trigger issues. What are the issues that trigger off people saying it being deceptive and misleading? Things like using the terms net zero or zero emissions and how you're using them and what you're making claims about. Just think it out. And shortly after that, the ACCC published a guide for business along the same lines, which we'll cover next. If you haven't seen these, the ACCC's 8 key principles, it's very good work. It's very on song for what I've seen. Firstly, be accurate and truthful, provide evidence, and I think we can come back to that later. Evidence is really important, and understanding what evidence is. Don't hide or omit important information. Qualify what you're going to say. Be careful with unqualified or broad claims or marketing claims, and use easy to understand language. And visual elements are just as important as the written word. So be direct and open about your sustainability transition, but really, really be thorough, because that's not easy to do. And there's now a new overlay of the ASB sustainability mandatory reporting, so that should help in some ways as well, I think. And Santos' case may also shed some light and some guidance on what can and can't be said publicly, particularly, and maybe some of the technical issues. Continue with that theme, of course, it's wise to track the regulators, the ones that can take action in this space, like the ACCC and the ASIC can as well. And they have major investigative powers under the consumer law, Australian consumer law, and they can seek large fines, up to $50 million. They can make or bring binding undertakings, etc. In March 2023, the ACCC did a good study called Greenwashing by Business in Australia. They looked at 247 businesses, and some 25 of those were energy companies. They were very concerned because their initial sweep showed 57% were making concerning claims. In the energy sector, 16 out of the 25 raised concerns, and that's their words. Now, the ACCC can issue a substantiation notice requiring you to give information and or produce documents that will be capable of substantiating or supporting your claims, and that's usually a first step. So they have a lot of power to do this in a stepwise format before anybody ends up in court. And the thing to recognise is that they've made a priority for their 2025-2026 enforcement around misleading pricing and claims in relation to essential services, with a particular focus on energy and telecommunications. And in May 2024, the Environmental Defenders Office also lodged a complaint with the ACCC, complained about potential greenwashing by the Australian gas networks, and that was related to renewable gases, for example. So what can we learn from these cases? What I'm going to show you today is from an expert witness perspective. It's not a legal perspective. It's a very different perspective from the lawyers, but it is somebody that's had to go through copious amounts of thinking about how to advise the court independently about such matters. Firstly, these cases take a lot of time. This case actually went from August 2021 through to November 2024, and we still don't have a judgment, and in the middle of that we had to change a judge. So the legal system takes its time, but it grinds pretty finely. It consumes a lot of management and key personnel time, and that's important for businesses to understand, and I'll come to that later on. They also cost a lot of money. You need good lawyers, you need even better senior counsel and King's counsel. There's a lot of time and energy goes into also instructing us as experts. We have to know the process, we have to follow it without bias, we have to be strictly independent, and of course it helps to be a little bit battle hardened and you get cross-examined by Australia's finest, it does grind extremely fine once you get to the court case. Santos received a $9 million cost order against the EDO for its case in WA. This was a failed challenge to the Barossa Gas Project, along with some scathing comments from the judge, which I won't go into, but it's important to understand even that case, costs were awarded at a level of $9 million, and I suspect that's pretty normal. They're also incredibly technical. I and two of my colleagues spent some 9 months fully producing over 100,000 words of expert witness testimony. There was workbooks, there was our report, there was responses to reports, there was joint expert reports to the courts, and I can tell you in most of these cases I will read thousands of pages of material. The other thing that comes as a surprise to some groups that go through this process is the powers of discovery. And it's very potent, nothing's off limits. In such cases I get to read lots of confidential material, emails, etc. And Facebook and LinkedIn material has also been used in cases, so everything's out there and open in the public, is available, plus they can subpoena all sorts of other information from you, and that subpoenaing can go on and on and on. I also get to regularly relive many of my old publications and probably this presentation as well, and sometimes to even comment on my old material, because they are looking back in my history to see if there's any bias, and that's fair enough. Things like voice recordings, adverts, blogs, speeches, etc., they're all discoverable, they're all used in courts, and so everything you say and put out there doesn't disappear, it's available for these types of cases. So always remember that when you're talking about how you're doing things, make sure you've got good evidence of how you've arrived at what you've said, and you've got support for it. The other thing that I've learned is the legal context is very specialised. I don't fully understand it myself. What you may think is fair may actually be a little weight in court as it relates to the allegations being made at law. What are the clear, defined allegations? Which law have you broken? The court will want to distill that down. In this case, we saw lots of issues associated with people really complaining about policy, not about law. So they were unhappy about the way certain regulatory things could work, but in fact they could work that way because they were allowed to work that way under regulation. But at a policy level, people disagreed with it, and that was teased out very well in the court. And so don't think that policy, don't confuse policy with regulation or legal requirement, and that is quite often done. Assumptions are just that. They're not matters of fact. Any assumption can be pulled apart. Experts can argue over it at length. An opinion must be based on some level of real evidence. And experience counts, but without supporting evidence, it is just an opinion. So opinions backed by reasonably strong evidence have a lot more force within the court, I found as an expert witness. And so when you seek opinion from anybody, if you want to, prior to publishing or doing anything publicly, then please do so and ask about the evidence behind it. Statements about matters must also be checked for validity. And I think that's me today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm grateful to be here, speaking at the Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to the First Nations people across Australia. My name is Virpi Barrett, and I've been working on the trading electricity markets across Europe and Australia for a couple of decades. And for the last couple of years, I've been fortunate to work a bit in green fuels markets as well. I've been with Sunshine Hydro, who is a developer of optimization assets in power grids, as well as in green fuel markets. So today, I'd like to talk about how to link these two markets. If we can get this working. So if we start building a picture of a fully decarbonized electricity market, we can start from wind and solar, but the end product really has to be 24/7 carbon-free electricity. So that means it's hourly matched to renewable sources. otherwise it's not really fully decarbonized, right? We have to do it for every hour. The other thing we need if we want to decarbonize the wider electricity or energy sector is that we need to decarbonize those molecules that are currently created with fossil fuels. One of the key assets that we need to do that is a long duration energy storage. You may know that pumped hydro, for example, is quite challenging to develop. We have found a way to make these projects bankable by co-optimizing them with some other assets, but importantly by giving them a better job. So not just arbitrage, but long-term contracts. So turning the variable renewable energy into long-term 24/7 carbon-free electricity and green fuels. Now, our optimization shows that this can come, or you can have very good outcomes from this. There will be a QR code in the end of this presentation, so you can have a look yourself how our models work on the live market on every 5 minutes. And I guess I could talk about this all day, but I have only 10 minutes, so we'd better move on to the green fuels. So let's take some biomass and turn that into transport fuels using long-term contracts again, and link that into the electricity market by boosting that production with some hydrogen. So then we're having e-fuel production alongside with the biofuel production. Now, you could see this as a strain on the electricity market. However, I also see that as an opportunity. And that comes in the form of a large tank farms with a first in, first out principle. So that tank farm works as a surrogate electricity storage. So it can release electricity back to the market, but simply by pausing the electrolyzers. And there is no round-trip losses involved. We're not turning green fuels back into electricity. We're actually taking the green fuels from the tanks and providing our long-term supply contract of green fuels. So let's look at a simple example of this. Now, it's a simple optimization protocol that I call a monkey protocol. We have an e-biomethanol plant. Don't know why it's not coming up. And that runs on, or it's got a 100 megawatt electrolyzer, and it runs on 24/7 carbon-free electricity. Now that's an important part of it. And I know that it's not really an off-the-shelf product at the moment, but if you do need to buy some, come and talk to me afterwards, and I think I can help you. Then we add 1 week worth of methanol tanks to it. And we trickle fill these tanks really slowly. And then we hire a monkey who will turn that electrolyzer off as soon as the price hits $200 per megawatt hour. The incremental capex of this storage is $27.9 million. And this is how it would look like on the market, or what it would have looked like last year. So when the price, so the red graph there, was high, the electrolyzer was turned off, and the methanol was supplied from the tanks. So you can see the blue graph there coming down. Then the tanks were filled again, and later the monkey ran out of capacity in the tanks. So that was a bit of a pity, because it basically meant that he missed out on some of these opportunities here because he didn't have enough fuel. So could we have had a deeper tank? Yes, absolutely. Really the only thing limiting the tank size there, so the depth of the storage, is how quickly will your fuel degrade. And we all know that it doesn't degrade in a week. So how did the monkey do? The trading profit in that 1 year was 27.4 million. Is it coming up there? So that was almost the whole capex in 1 year. I just wonder what a human could have done, or an AI. And this year that we're looking at, it's not like an anomaly. It's just a normal business as usual year. There was no COVID, there was no Calide exploding, there was no global energy crisis coming from the Vladimir Putin's war. At least it didn't influence the market at that point anymore. So I think that it looks like it would do pretty well. But let's see how does that compare to other kind of batteries and pumped hydro. So the only other storage that you can think of in Australia that lasts for a week is Snowy 2.0, but we can also compare it to other typical pumped hydro and also flow batteries. We've chosen 100 megawatts, just like our electrolyzer, to make the comparison easier, but that's still clear as mud, isn't it? So let's have a look at comparing the capex per capacity. So there are two kinds of capacities when you think of energy storage. There's the power capacity, which tells you how many megawatts can you draw from it instantaneously. And when you look at that comparison, you can see that those tanks are about an order of magnitude cheaper than the next cheapest option there. The other side is energy capacity, and that tells you how many kilowatt hours can I draw before the tank is empty, or the storage is empty. So you can say that it gets really quite ridiculous there. I had to put a magnifying glass because otherwise you wouldn't see the bar there at all. But we're comparing like $1.66 to $650 per kilowatt hour. So I think we can conclude that this is an extremely cheap optimization tool. Remember that each of these projects could go to an energy trader and sell this capacity to them with a tolling agreement, when the electricity trader can then play the capacity the way they want to. But they have a very different cost base behind them when they go to that negotiation. An additional benefit of this is something we've touched upon quite a few times this week, which is fuel resilience. However, you have to remember that then you can't hire a monkey anymore because that becomes a little bit more complex optimization between the electricity market, the fuel market, and then also maybe the biomass supply. You can't use this for soaking up your solar though. This is really an optimization tool only when you are discharging. And maybe it is still quite challenging to get your hands on that 24/7 carbon-free electricity that it is based on. You could, if you have a wind-following electrolyzer, you could look into it as well, but obviously it'll only work when the wind blows. So here's the QR code I promised. I'd like to leave you with the two key messages. One is that storing electricity as a fuel in a surrogate storage is very, very cheap. So some of you have been quite keen to throw the e-fuels into the too hard basket. But if you are developing them, maybe this will make it a little bit less hard. The second thing is that if we do want to decarbonize our entire energy sector, I think we can't keep kicking the can down the road with a 24/7 carbon-free electricity. We really have to get moving with that, and I think we all have a role to play. At least as a user of electricity, we can demand for it, but particularly for those who are setting the policies and setting the standards and incentives, please consider it now because we will need it by the time that we are fully decarbonizing our grids. So thank you very much.